He was posting a joke, you understand? And like all the best jokes, it had to be explained and then deleted. First, he was Jesus, then he wasn't Jesus, he was a doctor, and now it was a joke. Why did I get kicked off the air again? I can't remember.
Donald Trump stood at his own podium, surrounded by his own people, with cameras rolling, and explained out loud, in plain language, exactly how he was working around the United States Constitution. He didn't whisper it, he didn't imply it, he said it directly into a live microphone. And by the time Jimmy Kimmel on one coast and Ben Mankiewicz on the other had finished laying out what that meant, the most powerful man in the world had nowhere left to stand. There are nights in American television when something shifts so quietly that most of the country doesn't notice it until the next morning. Not the nights that announce themselves with breaking news chirons and urgent music stings, the quieter ones. The nights where you set your coffee down, lean toward the screen, and realize that what you are watching is not entertainment, not a monologue, not a standard political segment. It is something rarer and more consequential. It is the moment when comedy and accountability arrive in the same room on the same evening. And between the two of them, leave a sitting president of the United States with his own words stacked against him in public view. On one coast, the late-night studio at Jimmy Kimmel Live was warm and packed, the lights bright, the audience ready, the desk positioned exactly where it always is. On the other coast, Ben Mankiewicz sat behind a different desk with a different approach and the same archive. Neither of them needed to invent anything. Donald Trump had already done that for them. The setting that made the night possible was not a late-night studio. It was a ballroom in Washington. The National Republican Congressional Committee had gathered, a friendly room, Trump's own people, lights up, cameras rolling, the kind of audience a president relaxes into because he believes he is operating among allies who will not challenge him, and a press pool too small to make anything stick. Trump entered the way he always enters rooms designed to receive him. Comfortable, expansive, the loosened version of the performance that only appears when he believes the ground beneath him is completely safe. He was wrong about the ground, because somewhere in that speech, in front of his own cameras and his own supporters, Donald Trump said something out loud that no modern American commander-in-chief had ever said so plainly into a live microphone. He said he would not use the word war to describe the military action in Iran, not because the situation did not resemble a war, but because, in his own explanation, if he called it a war, he would need congressional authorization. The room heard it, the cameras caught it, the archive preserved it, and two broadcasters, watching from opposite coasts, already knew exactly what they were going to do with it. Jimmy Kimmel addressed his audience the way he always addresses them when the material is serious beneath the surface, with a smile that holds just enough distance to make you feel the weight of what he is about to say. He told his audience this was not World War III. It was, he said, World Military Operation 3. The studio laughed. Of course it did. But it was the kind of laughter that lingers in the chest with a slight unease. The laughter that arrives when absurdity is being used to carry something real. Because the joke was not the point. The joke was the frame around the point, and the point was sitting in plain view. A president of the United States explaining on camera that he was deliberately avoiding a constitutional trigger word in order to bypass the approval of Congress. Not a leak, not a private memo, not an anonymous source or a second-hand account. His own voice, his own setting, his own cameras, his own people in the room. On the other coast, Ben Mankiewicz did not reach for jokes. He reached for timelines. He began laying out what had actually occurred in the previous 72 hours, one documented moment after another, each supported by clips, each time-stamped, each placed in sequence with the claim the administration had been publicly making. Trump had said Iran was eager for a deal, weakened, ready to negotiate. Mankiewicz presented the documented responses. Iran had publicly refused to engage through Jared Kushner or Steve Witt, while hinting that only the vice president might be considered a viable channel. The contradiction between the presidential claim and the Iranian response required no editorial interpretation. It simply required being read aloud, in sequence. Kimmel turned this development into one of his sharpest observations of the week, delivered with the particular deadpan of a man who has realized the punchline is already in the headline. Then Mankiewicz shifted focus to the map, not the Persian Gulf which had dominated the coverage, the Red Sea. While most commentary remained fixed on the Strait of Hormuz, he highlighted what had already happened. The Houthis in Yemen had launched ballistic missiles into Israel, effectively expanding the conflict into a second theater. For months, they had signaled they were waiting for a moment. That moment had now appeared to arrive. He did not speculate. He did not editorialize. He presented what had already occurred and placed it next to what the administration had been saying, and allowed the gap between the two things to do its own work. The contradiction, laid out in sequence, became increasingly difficult to look away from. Either the administration's narrative was accurate, or events on the ground were moving in a direction that the official statements had not accounted for. Then came another moment from the same Washington speech. Still at the podium, still in front of his own audience, Donald Trump turned his criticism toward the United States Supreme Court. Not carefully, not obliquely. He called the justices criminals, including those he himself had appointed, and accused them of costing the country vast sums of money. Kimmel did not need much setup. The footage carried everything it needed to carry. Mankiewicz did not need interpretation. The contradiction spoke entirely on its own terms. A president who had built his political identity around law and order, calling his own Supreme Court criminals. A president sworn to uphold the Constitution, explaining in real time how he was engineering his way around it. A president whose political brand depended on loyalty, discovering, in the same week, visible fractures in the institutions he had expected to hold. Each moment had been delivered by Trump himself. Neither broadcaster had invented a single word of it. Then came the detail that shifted the tone of the entire evening into something harder to dismiss. Trump referenced a mysterious gift from Iran. Later, during a cabinet meeting, he revealed what it was: 8 boats of oil. The country the United States was confronting militarily. The adversary whose alleged weakness had been cited to justify the action. The nation whose waterways were now central to a conflict Trump had carefully avoided calling a war, had provided a shipment of oil as a gift. Even as tensions escalated, even as key waterways remained under strain, even as the conflict appeared to expand beyond its original theater, no commentary was required. The sequence assembled itself. The president had said he avoided the word war to bypass constitutional requirements. He had criticized the Supreme Court justices he appointed as criminals. He had described receiving oil from an active adversary. Iran had publicly rejected his chosen envoys. The Houthis had expanded their military role. 2 broadcasters, using entirely different methods, entirely different tones, entirely different approaches, simply placed these moments side by side. Kimmel with precision and humor, Mankiewicz with timelines and documentation. And they allowed the audience to do the arithmetic that the official statements had been designed to prevent anyone from doing. The room on the NRCC footage showed Trump comfortable, expansive, unguarded in the way powerful men become when they believe the setting is fully controlled. The room on both coasts watched that footage and understood something that Trump had not anticipated when he spoke those words: that a room full of allies is still a room full of cameras. Some nights the story is shaped by the people telling it. Some nights it is shaped entirely by the person at its center, speaking plainly, with cameras rolling, leaving a record that requires no embellishment, no reconstruction, no editorial interpretation beyond the act of playing it back. This was one of those nights. By the following morning, the clips had already traveled, not because they were packaged dramatically or introduced with manufactured outrage, because they were clear, because they took what had been said in a friendly room by a man who believed he was among allies, placed it next to what had actually occurred, and invited millions of people to notice the space between the two things. That space, between the claim and the record, between the promise and the timeline, between the narrative and the documented sequence of events, is where accountability actually lives. Not in op-eds, not in congressional hearings, not in the careful language of formal criticism, in the gap, visible to anyone willing to look at it. Trump would continue. He always continues. He would return to another podium, another friendly room, another speech built on the same confident architecture of assertion and volume. And the familiar cycle would activate again. Statement, contradiction, reframing, renewed attention. But the archive does not reset between cycles. The timestamps stay where they are. The clips remain exactly the length they were when they were recorded. And 2 broadcasters on opposite coasts had just reminded several million people of the most important thing about the record. It does not require anyone to tell you what it means. It only requires someone willing to play it back. This is what accountability looks like when it works quietly. No dramatic confrontation, no explosive hearing, no single devastating revelation. Just a president speaking plainly in a room he believed was safe, and 2 broadcasters with different styles and the same archive, making sure that the country heard exactly what he said, placed next to exactly what happened, without anything added and nothing taken away. The word war was avoided deliberately. The Constitution was described as something to root around. The adversary sent oil while the conflict expanded. The Supreme Court was called criminal by the man who appointed it. And the Easter egg roll happened because the White House tradition dates back to 1878, and even on the nights when everything else is is breaking open, the eggs still roll. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications, because the archive is always open. The timestamps never change, and the record has a way of catching up to the story no matter how carefully the story is managed. Some nights, the most powerful thing in the room is not the man at the podium. It is the camera pointed at him.